Hey there, Internet. Welcome back to the bunker in Cambodia, otherwise known as my garage here in Pier, and for another episode of Mr. Mr. V's Garage Band. Today we're going to be taking on this woodwind instrument, which is really not an instrument, it's actually two instruments put together. I'll get to that in a second. You know it as the clarinet. We're going to talk a little bit about where the clarinet comes from and why I said it's actually two instruments put into one, what it's about, what makes it up, how to put it together. We're going to make some sound with the mouthpiece and talk about this funky piece of wood that's a really, really, really special piece of wood that makes most woodwind instruments go. Flute being an obvious exception because flute doesn't have reed, right? First of all, again, I hope you're enjoying your Holy Saturday. For all of you that are out there on the front line doing the thing, keeping us happy and healthy, whether that's stocking grocery shelves or out there in the medical field, taking care of all those people who need the help, or whether you're doing some other essential task out there. Thank you so very much for being there for us, so that we can stay home and do our part to curb what's going on out there. We couldn't do this without you. Yes, we have we have a nice little stockpile of stuff going on over there. Thank goodness for internet grocery shopping, but thank you to all of you who are out there doing the thing. All right, let's move on. The clarinet. Member of the woodwind family, my good friend and instrument dealer back in the Chicagoland area, Paul Ramsire, used to call the clarinet the band director's best friend. And now that's not to say that clarinet players couldn't be your best friend. They certainly could. But it's the best friend because it does so many things. No other woodwind instrument has the range that a clarinet does. I mean, really, a clarinet can play almost as low as a tenor style instrument, so like almost as low as a trombone, tenor saxophone, and almost as high as the upper register of a flute. So that's a lot of ground to cover. In fact, most bands take clarinets and they'll split them up into 1, 2, or even 3 parts and stack them together. I do not have one of the larger members of the clarinet family, the bass clarinet, here with me in captivity, but the clarinet, it actually has a giant family of instruments, all the way up from the tiny little E-flat clarinet, which is about yay big, down to the sub-contrabass clarinet, which is, it looks like somebody took a paper clip and turned it into something the size of a giant tree, and you have to sit up on a special tool, and all sorts of pads have to be made to do with it. You might recall, if you've gone back and watched the episode on the flute, that there was this guy in the 1800s named Theobald Boehm, or Boehm, I assume is how we would anglicize it, who took the open-hold flute recorder concept and his knowledge of metallurgy, because he was a goldsmith, and created all sorts of mechanical pads, up and down kinds of things for the flute. And we created this modern beast. We have the modern flute, the modern transverse flute. Well, guess what? All the other woodwind instruments were like, I want me some of that. And they took the same system, or close to, and applied it. And so the modern clarinet is actually very, very, very similar in mechanics to the modern flute. There's a big difference, though. And I'm going to pull the clarinet up here so you can get a better look at it. You can see that there are open holes on the clarinet, which means that it retains some of that old primordial, primeval, primitive, open-hold flute, recorder-esque kinds of mechanisms from way back in the day. And that is actually something that helps create the very unique clarinet sound, but it is also something that makes playing the clarinet quite a unique challenge. Most other woodwind instruments do have that padding mechanism, and there are some spots on a clarinet where there are pads. You can see down here towards the bell. See if I can get that one. Ah, there she goes. That's a pad, but the spot where your fingers, most of your fingers are going to go, they are there. It is actually open hold, and that makes it a little bit of a challenge. All right. The other thing that's interesting and unique about the clarinet is how many pieces there are to it. You see it as one solid piece here. We're going to take it apart and then put it back together, hopefully in the right way, because it was playing very well for me before I went live. So I'm hoping I'm going to be able to put it back together and still have it play very well for me. So we're going to take it apart piece by piece. We'll start at the bottom. The bottom is, you guessed it, it's, if I did this, you would probably recognize it. This is the bell. Now, remember yesterday, we talked about the bell for a brass instrument. All the sound comes out of the bell on a brass instrument. No, not on a clarinet. Any woodwind instrument, wherever there's an open hole, sound is going to escape from. Okay? So clarinet has that weird sound quality where sound kind of comes out in a big round circle, not straight being fired from a gun. Okay, that's a quality of woodwinds. Okay, so after the bell, this is what I lovingly call the bottom joint. Right, it's the bottom part of the middle part of the clarinet. Okay, then the upper joint, and then this is not one solid piece either. Okay, here's where it gets tough. Need some cork grease. Okay, and this is the barrel, and the barrel connects this lovely piece of equipment, also called a mouthpiece, to the rest of the clarinet. And I suppose it's called the barrel because it's kind of like, I guess, like the barrel of a gun. You know, the barrel of a gun funnels the bullet out. The barrel of a clarinet funnels the sound, the vibration from the reed down into the clarinet, I guess. Or I guess you could say that looks kind of like a barrel. You know, I don't know. I haven't been to a whiskey distillery anytime recently. So let's take apart the mouthpiece, because even the mouthpiece is not one solid piece. It's got three distinct parts to it. So the mouthpiece by itself, you can see, has this nice little slope here. That's where your upper teeth are going to rest. It's got cork on the back end of it to seal the airflow into the rest of the clarinet. Now, other instruments that have reeds, like an oboe or a bassoon, that cork gets put in different locations. Even on a saxophone, the cork is actually on the neck of a saxophone. So the clarinet's actually the one instrument where the cork is actually built onto the mouthpiece. That's really important because that seals the sound from the mouthpiece going straight into the instrument. Okay, if you flip it over, you can see that this part of the mouthpiece is flat, right? And I love to ask my students on day one, what's a flat thing that you set things on top of? And most of them will actually say a desk, school. And I say, think a little bit differently, think outside the box, and they'll end up saying table. And that's right. This part is the table of the mouthpiece. And it's the flat thing that you're going to set this on. This is a clarinet reed. Now, I did a little bit of digging because I kind of knew some about stuff about this, but I just wanted to double check. This is not just any old hunk of wood. I can't go out there into my yard and cut down the walnut tree and chisel this out and have it work on a clarinet. Well, I suppose maybe I could, but it probably wouldn't. This is made out of a very special kind of, basically kind of like a tall grass cousin of bamboo. It grows in lots of places around the Mediterranean and in the Middle East, which makes sense because you think of the Middle East, it's where shawms and bagpipes actually originated from. But it is actually grown, the cane that they like to use for reeds is actually grown in the, I'm going to mess the pronunciation up, but it's the Var region of France. And that is like where 95% of the world's reed cane comes from. Now, the actual reed plant, the scientific name is Orundodonex. Sometimes it is called giant cane, elephant grass, or giant reed, just to name a few. And so they will cut the cane down, and then they'll give it time to rest, to kind of adapt to being not hooked into the ground anymore. They'll let it dry out a little bit, and then they will slowly begin taking chunks of it. They'll cut it into blocks, and then cut a small part of the block off into, it'll look like a little strip, and then they just gently file it away. Any oboe player or bassoon player who has made their own reeds knows this is a process that sometimes it can take weeks to get a good reed put together. Some of it is done with machines. A lot of it is done by hand anymore. And then they file it down to, it is just this thin, very, 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 very fragile piece of cane that is going to vibrate. Now, the front of the reed vibrates kind of in a sine wave like this when air passes over it. And that's what creates the sound for a clarinet. So I'm just going to put it in my mouth real quick just to get a little bit of moisture back into this. Oboe players, bassoon players, and other double reed players will use water. Saxophone and clarinet players typically just use good old-fashioned mouth lube, otherwise known as spit.